Today I'm going to show you how the alphabet has evolved over the last 4,000 years, from its earliest forms to the modern Latin script, which is the alphabet that is used today to write English and many other languages. I'll be using my recently updated evolution of the alphabet chart, which is the alphabet that is used today to write evolution of the alphabet chart, which is available as a poster from my website usefulcharts.com. I'll be starting by giving you a general overview of the various stages that the alphabet has gone through, and then I'll be taking a look at several of the individual letters, one by one. So the first thing you need to know is that not all writing systems are alphabets. In a previous video, which I'll link to in the description, I talked about 5 main types of writing systems. Of these 5 types, the earliest one to develop was the logosyllabary. A good example of a logosyllabary is ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. In most cases, a hieroglyphic symbol did not represent a single sound, like in an alphabet. Instead, it represented an entire word or syllable. But at some point, approximately 4,000 years ago, someone in Egypt had the idea to use hieroglyphs in a new way. They devised a system by which there was just one symbol for every one phonetic sound. By doing so, they were able to reduce the total number of symbols needed for writing from several hundred to just 20 or 30. So, for example, this crude drawing of a house, shown from above like a floor plan, came to represent something like the sound B, and this fish came to represent something like the sound D. So it was in this way that the alphabet was born. The name given to this first version is Proto-Sinaitic. It gets its name from the Sinai Peninsula, which connects Egypt to what was once the land of Canaan. It was here that the first inscriptions made using this script were found, although examples have since been found in both Egypt and the southern Levant as well. Because of this, there's some debate over whether the invention of the alphabet took place in Egypt or Canaan. However, what we do know is that it was in Canaan that the idea
Ну, что, серьезно, нормально, что не было. Думал, сначала история будет. И что больше верно, все, что ли? Что за бред? Ну, похоже на то. Понятно. Ну, вообще не то. Это уже что-то другое, да, понятно. Вдохновленная просто. Она тоже любит быть называть. Ну, нормально, кстати, это. Нет, ладно, ладно. Не рассказывай ничего. Все, я молчал. Что?
Of using an alphabetic form of writing really took off because by the year 1000 BCE and in the centuries that followed it, we have lots of examples of a stylized version of the script being used throughout the Levant, both by the Phoenicians and by the ancient Israelites. Generally, this version of the alphabet
Надо не сразу.
alphabet is called Phoenician, although when found at ancient Israelite sites, it is called Paleo-Hebrew. But basically, at ancient Israelite sites, it is called Paleo-Hebrew. But basically, they're the same. Note that I've shown the more familiar Paleo-Hebrew, but when found at ancient Israelite sites, it is called Phoenician. Although when found at ancient Israelite sites, it is called Paleo-Hebrew. But basically, they're the same. Note that I've shown the more familiar square Hebrew letters below for reference, and so that we have names that we can use for these early symbols, like Aleph, Bet, and Gimel.
Смотри, 750 лет прошло, 750, понимаешь? Ты не понимаешь, то есть это вся история, как бы, то есть как бы, да, понимаешь, 100 лет с тех пор, как изобрели все что угодно, то есть как ладно, что ты? Всех я так достал, понимаешь, ну ладно, я не утверждаю, ладно, может, дело не в этом. Я сам себе просто, ну как бы, как я не слышу. Дайте мне выгодно, да. Да, понял меня, что он совета говорит, думал, говорил свежий, да. Я вообще так, что сделал, ладно. Да, да. Наоборот, нет. Нет, ты знаешь, я тоже да. Можешь не быть, ну.
It's interesting to note that the earliest portions of the Hebrew Bible would have been written in this ancient script, not in the square letters used by Jews today.
Что-то ты там хлопаешь. Ладно, так. А, ну да, эти день алкоголиков. Это зритель. Травмопункт. А ожоговые даже, ну, как бы истории разные бывают, да? Ладно, это уже излишне. А если забываешь, то самое.
Those developed several hundred years later. But on this chart, we are concerned with the evolution of the Latin script. So instead of tracing the development of these early letters into later Middle Eastern scripts, like Hebrew and Arabic, we are now going to turn our attention to the Greeks. I've labeled this third line Archaic Greek in order to distinguish it from the more familiar classical Greek letters, which are still used today. However, I've shown the modern ones below line Archaic Greek in order to distinguish it from. I've labeled this third line Archaic Greek in order to distinguish it from the more familiar classical Greek letters, which are still used today. However, I've shown the modern ones below for reference, so that once again we have names that we can use for each letter. I also want to point out that there was never a single archaic Greek alphabet. There were actually many different versions with slight variations that were used throughout the Greek-speaking world. So what you see here is a bit of a combined representation. The important thing I want to point out at this stage is that the sound value of several letters changed significantly. Prior to the Greeks, the alphabet was strictly a consonant alphabet, also known as an abjad. This means there were no symbols that stood for vowels. But the Greeks changed this. There were several Phoenician letters that they did not have a use for, such as the aleph and hey. So they instead repurposed those symbols to stand in for vowel sounds. So aleph became alpha, which is an A sound, and hey became epsilon, which is an E sound. But the shapes of these letters basically stayed the same. So keep in mind that this entire chart is focused on the evolution of the letter shapes, even though those letters were often pronounced differently at different times and places. I'll also point out that it is from the first two letters of the Greek alphabet, alpha and beta, that we get the word alphabet. Okay, so the next stage is Old Italic. Again, there was no single Old Italic alphabet. Instead, there were many different versions, of which the most important was perhaps the Etruscan alphabet. But what I've shown here is kind of an amalgam of different Old Italic scripts. The most important thing to point out at the Old Italic stage is that several letters were dropped. This is because there were some sounds that Greek speakers made that Latin speakers did not. So for example, the Greek letter theta was not needed for ancient Latin, so the ancient Latins simply dropped it from the alphabet. I'll talk about some other changes in a bit, but for now, take note that the actual letter shapes didn't really change much between these two stages. And many of the shapes are actually quite recognizable, even in these archaic forms. It was during the period of the Roman Empire that the Latin alphabet reached the form that we know today, although at this point only the capital letters existed. It's important to note that the ancient Romans did not distinguish between an uppercase and a lowercase. It's also important to note that they did not have 26 letters like we do today. They had only 23. Missing were J, U, and W. So during the lifetime of Julius Caesar, his name would have been written like this. I'll say more about J and U in a moment, but the biggest question that most people have at this point on the chart is, why did some of the letters flip? Well, originally many of the letters, like B or K, could be written either way. This was because originally the Greeks and Romans wrote both left to right as well as right to left, and the direction of certain letters depended on the direction of the writing. But eventually, writing left to right became standard, perhaps because most people are right-handed and therefore less smudging takes place when you write left to right. Of course, when it comes to alphabets like Hebrew and Arabic, they are written in the opposite direction, right to left. Now, at the same time that the familiar Roman square capitals were being carved into stone, everyday writing, among those who were literate, was actually taking place in a slightly different script, known as cursive. The word cursive coming from the Latin root for running, or doing something quickly. So originally, Roman cursive looked something like this, sort of a sloppy version of the capitals. But eventually it evolved into what became known as New Cursive. So by the time that the Western Roman Empire fell, the emperors would have been writing out their various decrees using letters like these ones. You can see that many of them look quite similar to the lowercase letters that we use today. Of course, when the Western Empire fell in 476, much of Europe experienced a so-called Dark Age, during which time there was far less writing going on. However, one of the places where a lot of writing did continue was in the Christian monasteries over in Ireland. There, a script developed known as insular, which also ended up being adopted by the Anglo-Saxons over on the island of Great Britain. Therefore, this style of writing is also sometimes called Old English. A little while later, over on the continent, a slightly different style of lettering developed called. A little while later, over this style of writing is also sometimes called Old English. A little while later, over on the continent, a slightly different style of lettering developed, insular, in Ireland. There, a script developed known as insular, which also ended up being adopted by the Anglo-Saxons. Fell in 476, much of it there was far less writing was in the Christian monasteries over in Ireland. There, a script developed on. However, one of the places where a lot of writing there, a script developed known as insular, which also ended up being adopted by the Anglo-Saxons over on the island of Great Britain. Therefore, this style of writing is also sometimes called Old English. A little while later, over on the continent, a slightly different style of lettering developed called Carolingian. This version of the alphabet emerged during the reign of Charlemagne, and by the year 1000, it had become standard throughout most of Europe. But remember, the printing press hadn't yet been invented, so all books were written by hand, which obviously took a long time. So as literacy grew and the demand for books increased, scribes eventually developed a script which they could write more quickly. This style was known as the black letter, or Gothic, and it was the dominant style up until the time that Gutenberg developed his famous printing press in the 1400s. At that point, the letter shapes quickly started to look like the lowercase letters we see in serif fonts today, and were combined with the old Roman capitals, which were used at the start of sentences in order to increase readability. So now that we've done that in order to old Roman capitals, which were used at the start of sentences, combined with the old Roman capitals in serif fonts today, and were combined with the old Roman capitals, which were used at the start of sentences in order to increase readability. So now that we've done that overview, let's go back and talk about some of the individual letters. In English, the first three letters of the alphabet are A, B, C. But in the Hebrew and Greek alphabets, which are older, the first three letters are the equivalent of A, B, G. The third letter, in both cases, being a G sound. What happened is this. Sometime during the period of the Roman Republic, the third letter of the alphabet started playing double duty and was used for both a G sound and a K sound. This led the Romans to make a major change to the alphabet. They kept the third letter where it was, but dedicated it to the K sound. And they created a new letter, which looked very similar, and placed it as the seventh letter. This new letter, which was basically just a C with an extra little line, became G and was dedicated to the G sound. But there was a problem. By this point, the order of the alphabet had become standard, and each letter was associated with a number. So when the Romans placed the letter G in the number 7 spot, they had to move the letter that had previously been at the number 7 spot. That letter was the letter Z, also known as Z. The Romans didn't use that letter very much, so they simply moved it all the way to the end, which is why the alphabet today ends with the letter Z. One of the most important letters in the alphabet in terms of its evolution is the 6th letter, which today is our letter F. That's because there are 5 letters in our alphabet today that all trace their origin to this one letter. Originally, it was depicted as a walking stick or staff and was probably pronounced something like W. In Hebrew, it is known as Vav. But when the Greeks adopted the alphabet from the Phoenicians, they split this one letter into 2. They called the original letter digamma, because for them it looked similar to gamma, but had an extra line. Hence, it was a double gamma, or digamma. It was eventually dropped from the Greek alphabet, but it stayed on in the Latin alphabet and became our letter F. But the Greeks also added a slightly different version of the digamma to the end of their alphabet and called it upsilon. Remember that the Greeks added vowels to the alphabet, and this letter was one of their vowels, something close to what we call the vowel U. However, in the Latin version of the alphabet, this letter was split into V and Y, and the letter V ended up playing several roles at once. Sometimes it was a vowel, like in Julius, but sometimes it was a consonant, like in the word valens, which means strong, although the Romans would have pronounced it closer to wallens. Eventually, the letter came to look like our closer to wat, strong, although the Romans would have pronounced it closer to wallens. Eventually, the letter came to look like our U, but it continued to do the work of both U and V, as well as sometimes W, all the way up until the Latin version, something close, Greeks added to the end of their alphabet. The Greeks also added a slightly different version of the digamma to the end of their alphabet and called it upsilon. Remember that the Greeks added vowels to the alphabet, and this letter was one of their vowels, something close to what we call the vowel U. However, in the Latin version of the alphabet, this letter was split into V and Y, and the letter V ended up playing several roles at once. The Latin vowel, different version, and was eventually dropped. Hence, it was a double gamma, or to gamma, but had an extra line, because for them, it letter into two. They adopted the alphabet from the Phoenicians. They split this one letter into two. They called the original letter digamma, because known as vav. But when the Greeks adopted the alphabet from the Phoenicians, they split this one letter into two. They called the original letter digamma, because for them, it looked similar to gamma, but had an extra line. Hence, it was a double gamma, or digamma. It was eventually dropped from the Greek alphabet, but it stayed on in the Latin alphabet and became our letter F. But the Greeks also added a slightly different version of the digamma to the end of their alphabet and called it upsilon. Remember that the Greeks added vowels to the alphabet, and this letter was one of their vowels, something close to what we call the vowel U. However, in the Latin version of the alphabet, this letter was split into V and Y, and the letter V ended up playing several roles at once. Sometimes it was a vowel, like in Julius, but sometimes it was a consonant, like in the word valens, which means strong, although the Romans would have pronounced it closer to wallens. Eventually, the letter came to look like our U, closer to strong, although the Romans would have pronounced it closer to wallens. Eventually, the letter came to look like our U, but it continued to do the work of both U and V, as well as sometimes W, all the way up until the invention of the printing press. At that point, it was split into U and V, and then eventually a W was added as well, which strangely actually often looks more like a double V. The other letter that we have today that wasn't in the original Latin alphabet is the letter J. Throughout most of history, the letter J was just a fancy version of the letter I, used whenever it came at the beginning of a word. But eventually, in many languages, it evolved as a unique sound, and therefore the fancy I was eventually added to the alphabet as the letter J. Let's now take a look at some of the letters that used to be in the alphabet but are no longer around. As I mentioned earlier, some of them was eventually added to the alphabet as the letter J. Let's now take a look at some of the letters that used to be in the alphabet but are no longer around. As I mentioned earlier, the Romans dropped a lot of Greek letters because they simply didn't need them. These included theta and psi, but also a letter called san that the Greeks ended up dropping as well. I should also point out that the Greeks added several new letters that never made their way into the Latin alphabet. These include phi, psi, and omega, which was based on the letter O, and also sampi, which the Greeks dropped as well. The only Greek-created letter that did make it into the Latin alphabet is the letter chi, which we call X. Finally, I want to point out two medieval letters that once upon a time were used to write English, but are no longer a part of our modern alphabet. Anyone who has studied a bit of Old English is likely familiar with these. They are thorn and win, and in both cases, their letter shape. They are thorn and win, and in both likely familiar with these. They are thorn and win, and in both cases, their letter shape was adopted from runic letters, as opposed to directly from Latin. Thorn was a th sound, and win was a w sound. But like I say, these two letters were eventually dropped, although thorn is still used in Iceland today. So that was a look at how the alphabet has changed over the centuries. Like I say, if you would like to buy a copy of the chart as a poster, you can head over to my website, usefulcharts.com, or simply follow the link on the screen now or in the description. Thanks for watching.
Я не помню. А, кстати,
What's up, everybody? Welcome, welcome. Adam Manis here. We're doing something a little different today. Good to see y'all. Thanks for joining me. So last week I did a little something where I learned a new tune, Roy Hargrove's Top of My Head. And I texted my friend Peter Martin. I was like, give me a suggestion for a tune. That's what he came up with. And a lot of you said that was a really useful lesson format to kind of watch me learn it in real time. And so I thought I would do the same thing today, only this time, as we start here, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And so I'm going to ask you to give me some suggestions. So please, give me some suggestions. Whatever you want. Well, not whatever you want. I'm gonna take your suggestions. I'm gonna pick the ones that I don't know, and I'll listen to a few, and then we'll just decide. Sound good? We'll give it a few as the room fills up. Smash that like button if you don't mind, to just kind of spread the word. But yeah, we're just gonna learn a new tune today, and I'll kind of narrate as we go. Sound good? Ruby says Olio. I kind of know that. We'll see. After Donna Lee last week, I'm questioning everything, but we'll see how that goes. So that's the first suggestion, Olio. What's up, Rimsel from Munich? Yeah, give me a tune suggestion. I want to learn a new tune, something I don't know today, and I'll do it in real time, and we'll kind of narrate as we go, like what we're thinking. Sound good? What's up, what's up? And smash that like button so we can get more people in here and get more suggestions. Give me your tune. I already know Solar, Evie. Thank you. Gavin says Dance of the Maya. Colleen says Dat Dare. Gary says, but you know everything. Not at all. Not even close. Dorina Cole says Indian Summer. I don't know that one. That's a good suggestion. Dance of the Infidels, I kind of know. Jesse says Anomaly, Velours. I can check that one out, sure. Joy Spring, I already know. Nefertiti, I know. Fee flat full thumb is one I've played. I don't know it, like I couldn't just play it for you, but I have played it. I'm looking for new tunes. Do an Elmo Hope tune, that's a good suggestion. I remember Clifford, I've played. It's not that tone. Rapid Trouble in Dreams is one I don't know. That's a good suggestion, Drew. Gerhard says beat the door open. I'm not familiar with that at all. Colleen, Up Jump Spring, I know. I'd be always down for another Roy Hargrove tune. Ooh. A Gilberto Bacchino. That's a great idea. Ooh, I love some Grant Green. Grant Green underrepresented on this YouTube channel as far as like how much we love him and how much we've not played his music. Night Streets is a chick tune I don't know, Juan. That's a great suggestion. These are all very good. Okay, I have some somewhere where the rainbow. No, Born to Trouble. Alright, we're getting some good suggestions here. Leave your suggestions for the tune we'll learn today. Almost Blue, that's a good one, Search. I don't know that. I would bear Nascimento. I think I've heard it, but I don't know it.
Меня дураком, наверное, считают. Ну, не знаю, да, как бы, да. Ладно. Ничего страшного. Ничего нормального нету, понимаешь, меня... Ну, сколько надо, чтобы прожить? Ну, учитывая всю, как бы, хренотень, да. Зависит от сколько будет стоить жилье. Да. Ну ничего, пока так. Зато меня терпеть не надо, понимаешь? Говорит обратно. Нет, я не такой, я не буяный, просто как фильмы, наверное. Что я же играю постоянно. Еще и болтаю сейчас. Сейчас разговариваю. Вдвоем. Нет, нельзя. Просто... Ну нет, вдвоем мы сейчас так. И как бы я не собираюсь вроде останавливаться даже. Скажи, нахера тебе эта жизнь сдалась, если ты, если ты не можешь вывести, за кем ты просто их дурил? Нет. Ну так, нет, вот люди женятся и работают, что-то там, как бы, реализуют себя так или иначе. Потому что у тебя был этот путь, это заложен в тебе, наверное, да, понимаешь? Да? У меня не было этого пути. Да. Люди тоже, да. От разной родни происходит, да. И не только там, не знаешь ты этого до конца, да, понимаешь, он тебя, даже ты сам не знаешь, что это, да, это не важно. Да. Нет, важно, что все нормально. Надо дальше просто продолжать с улучшением, как бы идти просто. Да, типа того. Нет, это не потому, что так надо, а просто ты сам так хочешь, наверное. И так, и всякий едок, потому что, да. Ну, по идее, так и надо, и хочу, и деваться некуда, и... Там, ну нет, я сразу же, а что, не так, что мы я понял, и это и хорошо, и прикольно, и прекрасно просто, да. И отдых даже не нужен, понимаешь, прям вообще мечта Буэда. Ладно, нет, просто, ладно уже, абсурд просто, да, все, бред уже просто какой-то, нет, ну ладно, понятно, конечно. Нет, реально, жизнь не может иначе быть устроена. Просто у нас, да, не тренированная, как бы, ну, если ты мужик. И, да, не очень, да, понимает. Вот жертвование, вот видишь, они все знают просто сами. Ну, может, я так вот понимаю, он тебя просто. Так нет, ну а что? Так вот это нет, не понимаешь, что ли? Ты не понимаешь? Ну как бы вроде как, ну поймешь, ладно, не важно. Да, ну для нас получается, да. Окей, так нет.
Great suggestion. Okay, we have some contenders already. This is good. This is really good. Well, I got my first vaccine shot this morning, so I'm feeling a little woozy. So we'll see how that factors into the whole situation here. A little bit more know. Django, I kind of know. Steps to Korea. Very early. I don't know, I've played it, Federico. That would be a challenging one to just get right here. Capivara by Hermeto Pasquale, that's a great suggestion. Oh, Jacob Mann Big Band, Koji. I'm a fan of Jacob Mann, that's great. Like Oscar Peterson, newspaper quest. Parisian Thoroughfare, Peter Martin has a great suggestion. I've played that before, though. But that early Bud Powell stuff. I've done most of that at some point. Alright, I have so let's check some out, you know what I mean? Let's see what we got here. So, let's check out this Giorgio Marquinho from Antonio. Hold on just a second. Let's see if we can get. Alright, let me see here. Just a second. So. There it is. So we're going to have a listen and see if we can pull it out. You know what I mean? Let's see what we got here.
Сразу было вышло надо. Ладно. сейчас поехать. Нельзя, значит, ничего, все. Поехал. Надо спать еще. Думаешь, опять что-нибудь пузом бить, что ли? Это же есть нефть. Тренироваться их надо, понял? Нет, понятно. Надо уезжать, но нет, понял. Ну, уезжать, надо работать. Ну, как бы и то, и другое, в смысле. Нет, ну, то есть находить работу и уезжать. Либо находить работу здесь и оставаться. Надоело. Ладно. Так, ну не надо. Что это такое вообще? Цыганщина, говорит, да. Ну, не совсем, неправда. Так еще как? Хотя, понял, нет, тихо.